It's my pleasure to welcome Sister Helen, her many friends and supporters, and of all of you here tonight to the opening event of the Church in the 21st Century's 2010-2011 program. My name is Bob Newton. I'm the Special Assistant to the President of Boston College and the Interim Director of the Church in the 21st Century. The center was founded 8 years ago during the clerical sexual abuse crisis as Boston College's effort to be a catalyst and a resource for the renewal of the church. Since 2002, we have sponsored hundreds of events, brought tens of thousands of people to this campus, had numerous publications, some of which you've seen as you entered, and developed a robust website focused on 4 critical issues facing the church: roles in relationships in the church, handing on the faith, sexuality and the Catholic tradition, and the Catholic intellectual tradition. The theme for this year's program and publications is grace and commitment, and more specifically, the vocations of laity, of religious, and of the ordained in carrying out the work of the church. If you look at the program for this fall semester and you look at the publication that was available as you entered, all of the articles in the publication are on that theme, and all of the programs that we will have on our schedule focus on that theme. To give you a sense of tonight's program, Sister Helen will speak for about 60 minutes. We will have questions for about 20 minutes, questions selected from those of you who filled out a question when you entered. And then Sister Helen will be available to sign copies of her book. I should also note that tonight's event is co-sponsored by Boston College's new School of Theology and Ministry. Let me now introduce Father Jack Butler, recently named Boston College's Vice President for University Mission and Ministry. Father Butler is a psychologist who himself has 20 years' experience in prison ministry. We welcome him to introduce Sister Helen.
When it was announced that Sister Helen Prejean was going to come and speak for C21, it was initially slated to be held in Robsham Theater. And as soon as it went up on the webpage and as soon as the invitations went out, all of a sudden, numbers started to grow and grow and grow. And so about a week or two later, an announcement came out and said, we're moving the venue from Robsham Theater to Conte Forum, because Robsham Theater, with its 565 seats, can hold the people that want to hear Sister Helen. So a few weeks after that, Bob gives me a call and says, Jack, I'd like you to introduce Sister Helen. And I said, that's an honor. I said, I can't believe it. I'm all excited. But I said, let's be honest, Bob. The woman doesn't need an introduction. If we get any more people, we'll be in the stadium. I don't think she needs a big introduction. She's become an icon for death row ministry. Many of us know her as an outspoken opponent of capital punishment. There's nobody who does prison ministry that isn't familiar with her name. Most of us here tonight, if not all of us, have read Dead Man Walking, an eyewitness account of the death penalty in the United States. She has another book, The Death of the Innocent, an eyewitness account of wrongful executions. And I'm proud to tell you, if you don't already know, she has a third book coming out, The River of Fire, my spiritual journey. But the reason it's a privilege for Boston College to have her tonight, and the reason it's a privilege for me to introduce her, is when I just met her when she was coming down the stairs tonight and said hello and welcome to Sister Helen, and they said, Jack will be introducing you tonight. She looked right in the eye and she said, wouldn't it be better to introduce Jesus? Well, Sister Helen, I want to tell you something. From my theological vantage point, I am. Because you're making Jesus real to people. Because the best thing about Sister Helen is she read the gospel and she believed in it. The best thing about Sister Helen is she fell in love with Jesus and wanted to follow him. And the best thing about Sister Helen is her work and her ministry isn't a theory, it isn't an ideology. It's a life that's given freely to others. And so we're proud to have her here tonight, and you're in for a treat. And it's my honor to welcome Sister Helen.
I was getting ready to come up here and stop you because you were getting out of control with this Sister Helen and Jesus. Kind of like the wake they were having, and the minister was going on and on about the guy in the coffin, saying he was this and he was that. And finally the mama said to the kid, go look in there and see if that's your pa. We're all just human beings together, but look, the words down here, if y'all can see them, are about setting the world on fire. Fire in the burning bush. One of the first revelations in the scripture of the heart of God was, I have heard the cry of my people. And Jesus, I've come to set fire on the earth. Fire, catching on fire, passion, being grabbed by something, being seized. It's what vocation is. It's what a calling is. It's what happens to us. And all I want to do tonight is just share with you what happened to me, what keeps happening to me. And that is what we all do with each other. We just simply say, let me give an account to you of what has happened to me. Just trying to live the life that Jesus set before us. I didn't always work for abolition of the death penalty. In fact, there was a long time in my life where I never thought about the death penalty. And for a long time when I was in high school, we didn't even hear much about social justice. And do you know, when I did the research for Dead Man Walking, I found out when I was at St. Joseph Academy in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, right down the street, not far from our school, was the jail where they had a portable electric chair where they would execute people in the electric chair for the crime, not just of murder, but for rape. Mostly black people, of course, and it was never for the rape of a black woman. It was always for victims who are white. And that has not changed in the death penalty. Of the 1,200 people who have been killed in this country by the state, over 8 out of 10 of them, it's because they kill white people, not because people of color are killed. It's still that way. Because white life is still more highly prized. There's more outrage over some crimes, but not over others. They just did a study in Baton Rouge that showed if you're a black man and you get murdered in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the chances that the DA is going to go for the death penalty against you is 97.3% that he won't. Because what does your life mean? And to presuppose that we could take into our hands that there are some crimes for which someone can get death means that we have taken on ourselves that we have the wisdom to know which lives are so valuable when they've been taken that we can seek the death of the one who killed that person. So I started out unknowing. I started out in my little bubble. I started out as a loved child in a Catholic family, saying the rosary every day, going to Mass. The beauty of what our Catholic faith gives us in so many ways, to feed us, to nurture us spiritually. But it hadn't flowered yet. It hadn't flowered into people who were poor or people who were oppressed, because I knew that they were there. But when the discussion began in our community, hot and heavy in the debates, where should we be as sisters in the modern world, and the sisters who were getting up to talk about social justice, I was the one on the opposite side, and I was saying, wait a minute. We are nuns. We are not social workers. What's all this social justice and working on all these issues? If the poor have God, they have everything. We're here to give a spiritual message. Not by bread alone do people live. And then Jesus even said the poor you're always going to have with you. Isn't that just the way the world is? Some people are poor. Read about the poor people in Pakistan, poor people in India. They starve. We got too much to eat. We got to go on diets. But that's the way the world is. I'm one little person. You think I'm going to change that? I didn't get it. And I resisted it. And Ignatius of Loyola, whose name is down there, I made the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. Religion is about practice. It's about spiritual exercises. It's about what we do with what we say we believe. It's not about saying I assent to some fossilized thing we say, oh, yeah, and like it's a cerebral thing. Yeah, I believe this, and this, so I'm a Catholic. It's what we practice. What exercise? What is it in our life? How do we articulate it? And I learned when I made the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius that we learn to discern when God's Spirit is moving in us and when it's another kind of spirit. And when God's Spirit is moving in us, we know the sign of it. We can feel it. And there's a peacefulness, there's a courage, there's a faithfulness, there's a commitment. We might get tired, but we have that deep conviction, yep, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. When the Spirit is trying to move us out of a groove, to move to another level, the waters are turbulent. We go, maybe this, maybe that. This feeling, kind of like balloons hitting the ceiling. I know I'm supposed to be doing more, but I don't know what. I'm going to BC here. It's one of the best Catholic colleges in the whole world, and I'm trying to sort it out what I'm supposed to be doing, but I don't know. I can see this, or maybe this. And that movement in us of being called and we don't know what. Well, around this whole issue of social justice, when I reflected back on it afterwards, why was I so resistant to this thing of social justice? Why am I getting up there and making those impassioned speeches? And I think it was because I knew somewhere deep inside myself a change was coming and I didn't know what to do with it. And it happened, and this is the first part of the story of Dead Man Walking. We went to a conference. A sister talked to us. Her name was Marie Augusta Neal. She's a sister of Notre Dame de Namur, taught at Emmanuel College for 40 years, sociology and the New Testament. There's a combination. Because you know the psalm that says, truth springs up out of the ground, not an airy theology. Out of the ground, what's happening on the ground with the people. And I think I was not sensitive to poor people or the struggle for justice because I had never been in those neighborhoods where the poor people were. Those are the people you see on the 10 o'clock news at night. In New Orleans, where we were, our mother house was out in the suburbs, and there were 10 major housing projects in New Orleans. I hadn't been to one of them. If some people feel called to go serve the poor, let them go, but that's not me. And you never know when God's Spirit is going to strike that fire on the rock, and Sister Maria Augusta Neal's giving a talk. How many talks had we heard as nuns? We were always going to conferences. And the first day I got through unscathed because she talked about the world, first world countries, poor countries, the G&P, and I knew things weren't fair. And then the next day she announced that she was going to talk about Jesus, and I thought I was home free because I knew about Jesus. I mean, I'd studied scripture at Notre Dame. I'd made spiritual exercises, St. Ignatius, meditated on the life of Christ. What's she going to tell me about Jesus? I don't know. So we really are talking about Jesus. Oh, he's gone. He introduced me and left. Tell him we're after him, that Father Jack. And here's what happened. I'm sitting there just like you. She's talking about Jesus. And she said this line. I still remember it. It's going to change my whole life. Jesus preached good news to the poor. And I thought I knew what was going to come next, about how every hair of your head is numbered, how loved by God each person is. And she said, but integral to the good news to poor people was that they would be poor no longer. And I thought, where'd he say that? Where'd he say that? I'm combing my mind for what I know about Scripture. And I got it. It was the community he inaugurated that changed things. And the first 300 years after Jesus, we lived that way in community. Those who had more than they needed shared with those who did not, so that people were not in need. And everybody was welcome. Women were welcome. Children who weren't even considered persons in first century Palestine. Everybody had a lot of kids so they could all work in the field, so maybe we don't starve that year. And Jesus holds up a child and says, whoever receives a child, everyone had dignity. And the kind of community inaugurated was so radical, it threatened everybody. It threatened the temple cult and those who were in charge of the temple sacrifices and who were receiving the tithes of the people who came in, who lived in palatial homes. And Jesus is turning things on their head, saying, not wealth, it's not that you're bad if you're a wealthy person, it's just it's going to be easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle. Clearly hyperbole. But what is it? What was he saying? Divest yourself of material things. How much material things you need to be happy? It was all about relationships. It was all about a community of love. Even of the stranger, even of the alien, even of the ones that other people wanted to despise and marginate and throw away. So when Marie Augusta Neal that day in June said those words, and I heard them, I realized I don't even know any poor people. And there were poor people right at our back door there in New Orleans. The same people who, when Hurricane Katrina hit 150,000 where there were not even buses sent for them, if you didn't have resources and a car and a way of getting out of New Orleans, you were left to drown. The same poor people who, after Hurricane Katrina, the public housing was bulldozed and torn down, so people who were exiled, who were poor and black, could not come back to our city, and it changed the demographics of New Orleans to majority white for a while. I didn't even know them. The only way I had known African American people growing up was that my father, who was a successful lawyer, and mother, we had African American servants. A woman who worked in the house and a man who worked in the yard. I did not know African American people as my peers, as my equals. And when I woke up, and here's the thing about waking up, it doesn't matter how old you are when you wake up. When we wake up, we have to act. No matter how simple the action, but it's important to act. And I moved into the St. Thomas Housing Project with 4 other sisters who had wakened up a long time before me. That's the thing about justice. By the time we wake up and get there, we always standing on the shoulders of other people who woke up a long time ago. And I began to learn from the people in St. Thomas what it was like to be poor and black, how you were treated by the police, what happened to you when you went to the public schools. We had a dropout center for people who had dropped out of high school, for people to get their GEDs. I'd gone to St. Joseph Academy, a wonderful Catholic high school. I learned public speaking when I was in high school. It was so good. I learned to write. So later, when I went to write a book, I knew how to write. I knew how to speak. Went to a great Catholic college. And these kids are coming into the Adult Learning Center. Well, how far did you get in school? 11th grade. Oh, look, that's great. You only had one more year to go. Let's see where your reading level is. Let's see where your math level is. And they couldn't read, a third grade reader. They couldn't read. And in another year, they'll be bumped out, given some kind of diploma that has no meaning. And they can't read. And it was coming to grips with, why have I been given so much? Why am I blessed to go to such a good school? Why am I blessed to have the resources to be able to travel or to be able to do things? Why me? And I realized, in living with the people and hearing their stories, and Sister Laurie told me, Helen, you don't have to have a blueprint in your back pocket of what you're going to do to eliminate poverty. Just be neighbor to the people. And I was, and they taught me. And so I'm ready now for the lives of the saints I had never read before. So I read about Dorothy Day, and I read about Martin Luther King, because I'm ready now. Because I'm reading them and I'm going, oh, wow, look what they did. What am I called to do? Gandhi with his experiments with truth. How can I experiment with truth? Who am I called to be? And it was while I was there that one day, coming out of that adult learning center, a friend of mine who worked in the Prison Coalition office, it's the first line of Dead Man Walking. Here comes Chava Colin out of the Louisiana Prison Coalition office. He has a clipboard. He has a project going on. Whoever he met that day, he asked, hey, you want to be part of this project? And he meets me. He goes, hey, Sister Helen, you want to write to somebody on death row? Be a pen pal, you know? I said, yeah, sure. I'm an English major. I could write some good letters. I didn't know they were going to kill this person. That they're going to kill him in the electric chair at midnight, 2 years after I began to write to him. Not only are they going to kill him in the electric chair, but I'm going to be his spiritual advisor, and I am going to be there when they kill him, and I am going to witness his death, and it's going to change my life forever. I couldn't have said yes to writing that letter, but see, I don't know what all you learn in the theology classes at BC or the Church of the 21st century, but I want to say this. God is sneaky. And we need to learn about that sneakiness of God. And I bet if we all could share stories, sneaky story number 1, sneaky story number 2, God sneaking up on us. Well, this was it for me. I get the man's name, Patrick Saunier. I get his prison number. I had never in my life addressed an envelope that said death row as the address. I mean, that's depressing to get your mail. Death row. Every time I look at my mail, I know I'm on death row. I wrote the man a letter. You know what the problem was? He wrote back. And there was an encounter. And that's when that's when the fire comes. That's when the flint comes out of the rock. Encounter. Really meeting somebody. And that was through letters. And I realized from his letters he had no one. His mother couldn't come visit him. Mentally, she was not very stable. She had tried once to go to death row in Louisiana, and she almost had a nervous breakdown. She couldn't go to the place where they were going to kill her boy. And he said, Mama, it's okay. Don't come, Mama. Just pray for me, Mama. Just write to me. And he's not even asking me to come. He just comes out in the letters that he was alone and he was glad I had found him. He was glad to get the letters. Thank you, sister, for writing to me. And I'm meditating one morning. This is several months after writing to him. And there it was. It was Matthew 25. That's what I use for my prayers, the daily scripture readings in the liturgy of the church. And there it was that day. I was hungry, you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. You know, we can rattle this off. We know how it goes. I was in prison and you came to me. It happens with scripture. It happens when you're reading the words and we go, I'm writing this man. He's alone. He's got nobody. And I wrote him a simple note. I will come and see you sometime. And he is so excited, and almost in return mail, here it is, the visitor form. Here it is. There are different categories for being visitor. Are you his relative? Are you his friend? Are you his girlfriend? Are you his spiritual advisor? And he said, I'm a Catholic and you're a nun. Will you be my spiritual advisor? And I fill in the forms. I have no felonies. Fill in the form. And little do I know that when they're going to kill him at midnight, April the 5th, 1984, at 5:45 in the evening, everybody's got to leave the death house except the spiritual advisor, who will be me. I wrote, I visited. That's the journey I take you with me on in Dead Man Walking. I was afraid. If you see the movie of Dead Man Walking, I work closely with Susan Sarandon, Tim Robbins on every line and every scene of that movie. They wanted to get it right. And you don't see me walking into the prison in charge. You see me rolling my eyes and scared. I read that sign in the visitor room, because you know New Orleans is real Catholic and nuns get a lot of respect. I mean, most of the time we don't even get speeding tickets or things, you know, because of the nun card thing. Almost everybody sent their kid to a Catholic school. But here's the Louisiana State Penitentiary, and the green sign said, anybody stepping onto prison property, you subject yourself to this body search, body cavities, dogs sniffing. I stopped reading the sign. My heart, I went, I am out of my league. I am out of my depth. And then the guards started bringing me to go see this man that I had been writing to, who was so nice in his letters. And it's very scary because it's loud. There are no soft sounds in the prison, even like elevator music going, or cement floors and clanging bars. And they're yelling as I'm walking, woman on the tier. And people are like shrinking back. And then we rounded a corner. And there was a green metal door. And right above it in red block letters, it said, Death Row. And he said, we'll go get your man for you. Put me in a room, lock the door. I'm locked in. Now they go and get him. And I was holding my cross and walking and just going, sweet Jesus, how did I get in here? I mean, I really don't know him. I've never been with a murderer before. Anybody can write nice letters. We got 2 hours. What am I going to say to him? Are we going to be able to have like a normal conversation? And then the guards brought him in, and they locked him on the other side of this heavy mesh screen. And he's in his prison blues. And I looked through that heavy metal grate into his face for the first time. And I was shocked. I know he murdered somebody. Maybe 2 people. I don't even know the crime yet. I could not believe how human his face was. I thought maybe his eyes would look mean, or there would be a set to his jaw, something. You must look a little different if you murdered somebody. And he was smiling, and he said, Sister, thank you for making that long drive to come see me. A lot of people say they're going to come. They say that in their letters. They never come. Thank you. The 2 hours flew by. Next thing I knew, the guard was saying, time's up, ma'am. You're going to have to be leaving now. I didn't have to worry about what I was going to say to him. It just all poured out. He had a presence. He had a caring presence. And I was driving home, and I remember thinking, he didn't even talk about the crime. And then I began to think, well, the first time I meet somebody, I'm going to trust them enough to tell them the worst thing I ever did in my life, that was going to take trust. And that I would just be faithful in visiting. I didn't know what was waiting for me. We hadn't killed anybody in Louisiana since the early 60s. There'd been a 20-year hiatus, even in Louisiana, the deep South states, because the Furman decision had happened in 72 of the Supreme Court, overturned all the death sentences. There was a time in the 70s in the United States where we thought the death penalty was going to be gone. Then in 76, the Supreme Court had put it back. And guess who was ready? Guess who the real practitioners were then and are now? The 10 southern states that practice slavery are the ones that have all the people that do the executions, and Louisiana was one of them. I found out from him in that first visit that his brother Eddie was serving 2 life sentences. And I didn't know anything about the legal system. In my second book, The Death of Innocence, I take you through the legal system. I take you through what happens in the courts. I take you through why we make so many mistakes. But I knew nothing about the law and how any of this worked. But I thought, isn't that funny? How do you decide? There's a murder and one brother gets death and one brother gets life. And I didn't know that then. And the Saunier case, Patrick Saunier and his brother Eddie, their case is more complex than this. But did you know if there are 2 people that murder somebody and there are no other witnesses, if one of them gets up on the stand and gives state's evidence against the other one, they get a reduced sentence for saying that? From square one, how do we know we're getting the truth? How do we get enough truth to be able to make a decision? You live, you die. Especially now, in every state, they have life without parole sentences if you don't get a death sentence. Who are we at this point to be able to say, no, not prison for the rest of your life. You deserve to die. How do we have the wisdom to know that? God wants to put a comma in a person's life. We say on him, we're going to put a period. You're going to meet God now. And I'm just beginning to get into it. I know nothing. And so while I'm visiting Pat, I begin to visit his brother while I'm making the 2.5-hour drive from New Orleans to our state penitentiary. I began visiting the brother too. And a couple of months went by of this. And then one day I went to the Prison Coalition office because I know somebody's been murdered. And I'm going to use this image. We're so used to going to a church and we see symbols of crucifixion, of execution. And now it has a whole other meaning to me when I go into a church. And there are 2 arms on this cross. And the gospel of Jesus stretches us onto both of the arms. On one is the perpetrator who has done an unspeakable crime that outrages us and makes us afraid and makes us say we have to do something tough. And on the other arm of that cross are the victims. People who get up, ordinary people like us, on a day like today, on a Thursday, on a Friday, in a certain month like November. And by the time that sun sets and that day is, their whole life has changed because somebody in their family has been ripped out by violence. It happens to people, good people, to families, to people just like us. And in this journey for me, I'm going to make mistakes all over the place, and I'm going to make a big one. The big one that I'm going to make is the victim's family. When I find out about the crime, I go to the Prison Coalition office. I ask to see all the case, the background information on the Saunier case. They pull out all these bland-looking manila files, and I open up the one on the top of the heap and look down into the faces of 2 beautiful teenage kids. And the terrible headline in big, bold, black letters, teenagers found murdered. November 4th, we're coming to the anniversary of their death, of how these 2 kids had gone to a Catholic high football game on a Friday night. And then the details of the story. There's the picture of Patrick, and there's the picture of Eddie scowling and looking mean. And there's the story of how that night those kids, after that football game, went to a lover's lane, a local lover's lane, to park by a sugarcane field, and the brothers were in the field, and they had 22 rifles, and they were hunting, and they had done this with other teenage couples, and these kids pulled up, and they are all alone and it is dark. Next thing you know, the two brothers are there with flashlights, and they look into their horror. They see each of the men has a gun. And the next thing you know, they're telling the kids to get out of the car. They're telling the kids they're the security guards that work for the people who own this property, and they're trespassing, and they're going to have to take them into the people who own the property. And that turns to, well, look, tell you what, if the girl has sex with us, we won't report you. 5 other teenage couples came forward when these 2 beautiful kids were killed, saying that's what they did to us, and that's how we knew what went on that night with a beautiful young man named David LeBlanc, who was 17 years old, and a beautiful young woman, Loretta Bourque, who was 18 years old. And their parents had sent their prom picture into the newspaper when they did the article about their deaths. And now I see what they did. This man I'm visiting, who's so glad to see me and who's smiling, and who I'll look at to that human face, and his brother, and now I know what they've done. And the letters to the editor are pouring in. People are so frightened for their kids. They're keeping their teenage kids at home. What kind of animal, what kind of scum, what kind of monster could do something like that to innocent kids? And all the outrage we feel, all the fear we feel that rises up inside us. And if you struggle with the death penalty, I understand, because there's a part in every one of us that struggles, because when innocent people have been ripped out of life in such a violent way, there's a part in all of us that says, well, whoever did this deserves the ultimate punishment. I've heard victims' families say, even life without parole is not just for them. My daughter is forever buried in the ground. And even if they get a life sentence, they're going to be able to call their mother on their birthday. They're going to be able to have friends. They're going to be able to read books. They're alive. And she's dead. And that's not fair. And the only thing that can equalize it is a death for a death. And when district attorneys go for the death penalty, that is what they do. I've been at death penalty trials. I've heard them say to the jury, people just like us, ordinary people who are now have this responsibility in their hands. You decide now, you 12 people, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, do we allow this person to live or does this person die? And for this person to die, all 12 of us have to unanimously agree, which means if any one of us votes not for the person to die, the person lives, so each juror has their life in their hands, each one. I read the paper and I looked and I saw the crime. I was horrified. And I'm saying both arms of the cross because we have this horror in us, an outrage over the death of innocent people. And I want to say it is ethical to feel outrage over the death of innocents. We should feel outrage. In our society, we don't feel equal outrage. We don't feel outrage over the death of a homeless person in the city as we do to somebody maybe that we know. And we know it definitely crosses race. That when people of color are killed, the death penalty is so seldom sought because there's not enough outrage in the community by the constituents in the community to say we want the ultimate penalty. But here, these kids, and I had this urge, I had this clear little signal, I ought to go see the victims' families. This is every parent's nightmare. Your kids go to a football game on a Friday night. The last thing you say to them is, honey, get your jacket, or honey, did you clean your room, or did you do your homework? Trivial things, and you don't know it's the last moment. If you had known, And you'd put your arms around your child and say, honey, I love you. I will always love you. You would make your words count, but you don't know. So you talk about the hem of your dress is out, or you didn't clean your room. Or remember tomorrow I asked you to do this. And I held back from going to see the victims' families because I thought, they're not going to want to see me. Everybody was Catholic in this. The Saunier brothers, the nun, the Bourque family who lost their daughter Loretta, the LeBlanc family who lost their son David. I was scared. When I wrote Dead Man Walking, my editor, in the first draft, when I came to the victims' families and that I hadn't gone to visit them, I hadn't reached out, I didn't write them a note, I didn't call them, I didn't visit, I didn't do anything. And my editor said, well, you know, Helen, that was really a big mistake. He said, it was cowardice, wasn't it? You were scared, weren't you? I said, yeah, I was. He said, look, when you write your book, don't just tell people the good stuff you did. And when you did it right, take them into your mistakes. Not just the peaks of the waves, but take them into the troughs where you do it all wrong. And then they're going to trust you because they know you're not afraid to admit your mistakes. God, what a mistake it was. I didn't do anything. And the moment that I met them, it couldn't have been a worse, more polarized time because it's a public meeting and it's a pardon board hearing. It's a public pardon board hearing where people come and all get to speak before the pardon board about whether Patrick Saunier should live or die. All the victims' families are there with all their friends and all their relatives filling the room. And they've been told, get your people there because you got to stare down that pardon board and not dare let this guy off. He killed your loved ones and he needs to pay. And you need to be there. There were only 3 of us there to ask the pardon board not to give Patrick death. And that's when I met the victims' families. How could they not see me as an enemy? I had done nothing for them. They see me now appearing before the pardon board to ask that Patrick Saunier's life be spared. We were walking outside while the pardon board was inside voting, and we were walking along the sidewalk and we ran into each other. And the Bourque family, Godfrey Bourque and his wife Blondie were first, and they saw me. And their faces were filled with this anger at me, which I deserved. And they just kind of averted their gaze and walked past me in silence. And right behind them was the other family, David LeBlanc's family, his father Lloyd, his mama Eula. And they came right up to me, right behind the Bourques. And so I expected the same anger, the same rejection, and surprised by grace. Lloyd LeBlanc walked right up to me and he said, Sister, I'm Lloyd LeBlanc. This is my wife, Eula. It's our son, David, who was killed. Sister, where you been? All this time. You've been visiting those 2 brothers and you didn't want to come see us. You can't believe the pressure we under with the death penalty. I didn't know he was under any kind of pressure. I thought any victim's family, given the chance, was going to go for the death penalty. What did he mean he's under pressure? He was the person who acted out of grace. And he said, Sister, you need to come see us. I pray in this little chapel. Come pray with me. You need to walk with us and know what we've been going through. And because he offered the invitation, I accepted. He was the gracious one. I had done it all wrong. And here I am in St. Martin of Tours Church, keeping vigil before the Blessed Sacrament with this man from 4 to 5 in the morning, and we're kneeling there and we're saying the rosary. And it's a Friday. So the Friday is when we remember the suffering and death, passion of Jesus. And I'm kneeling alongside a man who's praying through the passion and death of his own son. And it was from the prayer, as we said the rosary, as he said his intentions, that I began to get an inkling of where his soul was. because he prayed for everybody, not just his family, not just for David, not just for his wife and Vicky and his grandchildren, not just for the Borks, but included in the intentions were for Gladys Saunier, the mother of Patrick and Eddie, who could not even go into the grocery store of the town. So much was she hated because of what her sons had done. People were cutting up dead animals and are throwing them on her front porch. Teenagers are riding around the house at night yelling, "Mother of the murderers, mother of the murderers." And the hatred extended to her sons comes to Gladys Saunier. And I'm kneeling by a man who's praying for her. He is the hero of Dead Man Walking. I'm the storyteller. And I did it wrong. I made a terrible mistake. This man is the hero because he shows us what is the journey that a soul takes who can go and hold up both arms of this cross. And the way he explained it to me in the stories in Dead Man Walking, and he speaks much better for himself there. He said, "Sister, you know when I said I was under pressure about the death penalty, I was. Everybody was saying to me, 'Lord, you gotta be for the death penalty or look like you didn't love your son David.'" Culture. It's culture. We live in a society. If everybody's saying to us, if you say you're not for the death penalty, it'll look like you didn't love your son, that's pressure on us. He knew what pressure was. And he said, "Sister, I tried to go there. I did. I tried to say, yeah, they're right. I want to see both of them die. I hope I get to pull the switch. But you know what? I don't like the way that made me feel inside. I've always been a kind person. I love to do good for people. I'm good with my hands. I can fix things. If I'm coming along the highway at 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody's broken down, I'm going to help them because it's who I am. And then I have those feelings coming in about, yeah, that's right. I hate him. I want to see him die. And I said to myself, they killed our son, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And I'm going to do what Jesus said to do. That's how he came to forgiveness. First of all, as a gift to save his own life. That forgiveness, he said a lot of people think it's like weakness. Oh, you kill my son. Oh, forgive and forget. That's kind of okay, like you're condoning it if you forgive somebody. I'm not going to let him kill me because I'm going to be just as dead. Lloyd LeBlanc's going to be just as dead if I can't live out of the kindness and love that I know is part of my being. Over these years, as I have met victims' families, I have met people, unbelievable things that they have been through. They are the witnesses that are helping our country come to grips with this, with the thing of the death penalty to put it away. You in Massachusetts do not have the death penalty largely because of the efforts from 1928 onward of the Massachusetts citizens against the death penalty, who have kept guard and vigilance in this state when politicians almost brought it back by one vote, almost brought it back. And they will continue to raise it because it is such a political issue. It is such a political issue because it's the most absolute, simplistic way of saying I'm tough on crime and he or she isn't. I'm for death. I'm for the ultimate punishment. Anything else is weakness. And the mass citizens, and sometimes they've called me in to be on their team to just try to help. Here are Julius and Ethel Rosenberg's sons testifying before your legislature. Don't bring death back to Massachusetts. Remember Sacco and Vanzetti, Fisher people, Italian fishermen that was singled out when there was a terrible murder and executed. We cannot have the death penalty in a civilized society, and because we can always make mistakes. And we are making mistakes. There are now 139 wrongfully convicted people who have come off a death row. You know who saved them in these Innocence Projects? College students like you here at BC. Innocence Projects, volunteer, college kids, get in there and find the evidence that was withheld, the DNA evidence that wasn't reported, the suspect. Always there had been another suspect on the police report, but they withheld that and didn't let that information come out. We are so fragile and we are so human, and when people are under pressure, we make mistakes. If it's life and the person's alive, we can maybe remedy it. But if we have killed them, we cannot. And we need to weigh that. And the mass citizens, where I'm going to be at the books afterwards, signing books, we have a little sign-up sheet for you. And it's to join the mass citizens, and also we have the play of Dead Man Walking for schools, so that through theater and drama we can get underneath this issue and really deal with the heart questions of what do we do with the outrage we feel over the death of innocent victims, and then what does it mean to say to the state, you can kill some of us? What does it mean? And I'm drawn into it. I'm in the death house with this man now. And he has 3 days to live, and he has 2 days to live. And I'm meeting the guards. Did we ever think of the people who have to do the executing for us? The people who have to practice and then strap the man in the chair. They practice when he goes calmly. They practice when he fights them every inch of the way, because finally they got to do it. They got to be the ones to carry out this justice for us. What happens to them? NPR did a thing on the warden who had presided over 100 executions. It's all legal. The Supreme Court says it's fine. It's according to the Constitution. When I had a chance, in the second book, The Death of Innocence, I talk about the dialogue that I had with Pope John Paul. And I said, Your Holiness, does the Catholic Church only uphold the dignity of innocent life? That's what the Catechism says. It says innocent life. And I'm all for the dignity of innocent life. I'm all for the protection of unborn babies, that they have a chance to live, or people with Alzheimer's, that they should not say, well, those people, they're not really alive anyway. Euthanasia is merciful for them. Dignity for life from the womb to the tomb. But Your Holiness, when I'm walking with a man to execution, as happened with Patrick Sonnier, he was the first whom I accompanied. And he's all shackled hand and foot, surrounded by guards, made defenseless in every way, and brought down this hall to that door, strapped down in that chair to be killed. And he said, Sister, please pray God holds up my legs. And I said, Your Holiness, where is the dignity in this death? Is it only the dignity of the innocent? What about the guilty? And I tell the story in Death of Innocence of what Pope John Paul did to change the catechism and to give us a strengthened position for the dignity of life. He was the first in St. Louis in '99, after the catechism was changed, where he stood before us for the first time and put the death penalty in with the other pro-life issues. The first to do that. And he said, even those among us who have done a terrible crime have a dignity that must not be taken from them. And that has been followed up by our Catholic bishops in 2002, declaring a Catholic campaign to end the use of the death penalty. To be for the dignity of innocent life, we have to be for the dignity of all life. But to stand for the dignity of guilty life is much harder. And this year, for the first time, when the bishops send out their packet on the pro-life thing in October, it will include about God's mercy, and it will include about the death penalty. Much harder moral struggle for us. all I want to do is invite you, and this is what we do for each other. This is why we belong to community, and we come and we share our experiences of faith, our experiences of life, and we put it in each other's laps, and we just say, think about it, reflect on it, pray about it, learn about it. And I invite you from the spark that maybe wasn't kindled here tonight to read and to learn and to be in a community of faith, to talk about, and then to take a stand. If you know where you are, I hope you'll sign your precious signature onto that Massachusetts Citizens Against the Death Penalty. I hope any of you involved in education will find out about the Dead Man Walking play that can be done in school, that takes it out of this cerebral thing and takes you through the whole experience. The victim's family's on this side, this guy on the other. And what does it mean to kill a human being at the end? Go through the experience. The church was the first to have theater. And we need it, I believe, in our educational process. Tim Robbins wrote the play. One more little invitation is the community of San Egidio is a community that started in Rome by young people, young Catholics, that is also here on the campus of BC. And they meet. I just went to their prayer. And they have prayer, the immersion in the gospel, the standing with the poor, and community of faith. And David, who's with the community, will be at the table with me where I'll be signing books, and you can take one of their brochures. It's for the young people or anybody who's here in the community of BC. Perhaps you want to join. There'll also be a brochure for anybody interested in prison visitation, to reach out to people in prison. So thank you for having me tonight. I'm going to stop here, and I think we have some questions. Thank you.